Kyle Busch has another new sponsor, and the Brickyard 400 could return in 2024. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got time to ask for another motorsports story discusser today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by starting looking at all the throwbacks that have been revealed over the last couple of days. The first throwback we're taking a look at is Blaine Perkins' throwback to Kevin Harvick's payday scheme. This is one of my favorite throwbacks I've seen so far, probably ever since the throwback race had begun. One, they've got the sponsorship correct, and the sponsor is actually sponsoring, which is really awesome to see, and I think it's absolutely accurate and very simplistic and looks absolutely amazing. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Brendan Poole's throwback to Bobby Allison. This looks pretty good in my opinion. Really cool to see that Ricker Racing is doing a throwback to one of the greatest ever, Bobby Allison. Really exciting stuff and love this throwback. The next throwback we're taking a look at is Chris Wright's throwback to Juan Montoya's 2007 Sonoma scheme. This looks absolutely amazing, looks incredible, and Young's Motorsports did an amazing job. And the final throwback we're taking a look at is Josh Reham's throwback to Ken Block. Really did a good job on this one, in my opinion. Probably not as good as the Riley Herbst one because Monster let them do what they wanted to do, but this looks really awesome. Looks really great, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Funko. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Wednesday afternoon that Funko has put on pre-sale a new NASCAR 75th line, collectibles of Bill Elliott, Jeff Gordon, and Dale Sr. Funko's had a partnership with NASCAR for the last year or two, and I think this is really awesome, really great to see that they're doing this, where they're going to have Funkos of some of the greats. This is Bill Elliott's 1987 scheme, Jeff Gordon's Rainbow Warriors car, and Dale Sr.'s Good Wrench car. Looks really awesome, looks incredible, and I'm really excited to see all this, and pretty cool to see if Funko is having a partnership with this, because I think this looks really awesome, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Michigan Speedway. As it was reported by Jeff Gluck and other reporters in the industry, that Michigan Speedway has already sold out the infield. This is really awesome. They still have not sold out the grandstands, if I'm not mistaken, but the fact that the infield's already been sold out, we've got about 3 months to the race actually happens, I think is absolutely phenomenal. From what I hear, the infield party atmosphere of Michigan is really phenomenal and amazing. So great stuff to see, and happy to see Michigan Speedway has sold out their infield. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Petty. As it was announced yesterday that Richard Petty has been named the Grand Marshal of the North Wilkesboro Hauler Parade. Of course, next week is going to be the North Wilkesboro festivities and the weekend. We got a lot to talk about around North Wilkesboro, but it's really awesome that Richard Petty's been named the Grand Marshal of the Hauler Parade. Pretty exciting stuff, and glad to see he's been named that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Darlington Purse money for this weekend. As every single time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockers tends to put out the purse money. And according to him, for the Cup Series, it's $7,282,000 or $222,261. For the Xfinity Series, it's $1,399,187, and for the Truck Series, it's $690,259. A little bit lower than normal for the NASCAR Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series, but nonetheless, it's still some pretty good purse money. Of course, Cup Series is always going to have the most money due to the charters. That's some pretty decent money for the weekend, in my opinion, and I'm really excited for the weekend because we got the Truck Series race that is going to be happening here tonight at Darlington, and really looking forward to that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Matt Kenseth and Jimmy Johnson. As it's been announced, and basically over the last few days, they have been announcing the top 75 greatest NASCAR drivers. And they officially confirmed the final 2 drivers that are going to be part of the top 75 drivers. The final 2 drivers are not a surprise, as it is Matt Kenseth and Jimmy Johnson. Matt Kenseth, of course, one of the greatest NASCAR drivers of all time, 2003 NASCAR Cup Series champion, and nearly won 40 NASCAR Cup Series races. Jimmy Johnson, to many, including myself, is the greatest NASCAR driver of all time, as Jimmy Johnson won 83 NASCAR Cup Series races, 7-time Cup Series champion, just one of the greatest drivers overall in NASCAR history. They're the final 2 to get in. They absolutely deserved it, and they're 2 of the greatest as well. Congratulations to 2 of them and the rest of the people that were inducted because they deserve it, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the NFL. Now we're talking about the NFL because of all the playoff races for NASCAR. And according to Bob Pockers, that Las Vegas Motor Speedway is the only playoff race that will have the same market as when the NFL game is playing. So when the Raiders are playing basically during the weekend of the Cup race in Vegas, they'll be playing in the Las Vegas area. This is really, really huge for a lot of reasons because a lot of the teams, of course, NASCAR is basically going to be around the time the NFL is going on. Because remember, the NFL is going to be basically on NBC, and of course, you're going to have NASCAR that's going to be on NBC during that time. But I think it's going to be very interesting to watch and what happens here in regards to those markets. It's going to be very busy, especially if you're coming in and out of town. And nonetheless, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens in regards to that. It's something for sure to keep an eye on. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the All-Star Race, as the trophy for the All-Star Race has been officially revealed. Now, I believe this got revealed on Thursday evening because, remember, actually Wednesday evening, because Wednesday was opening night for North Wilkesboro. And this trophy looks pretty cool in my opinion. I think it's going to be really exciting whoever ends up winning this trophy because remember, the All-Star Race is next week and is official return to North Wilkesboro for the first time since 1996 for NASCAR events. Overall, I think it's really cool to see. I love the trophy that they've presented, and I'm excited to see it out on the winning. Whoever wins it, they're going to enjoy it, in my opinion. It looks really, really awesome and really exciting, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jerry Baxter. Now, Bob Poggers put out a tweet yesterday talking about Jerry Baxter, and apparently Jerry Baxter went to the hospital last night. But apparently he is currently resting and is in good terms. Jerry Baxter, for those of you who do not know, Jerry Baxter is one of the best crew chiefs we've seen in all forms of racing. He's been around for many, many years, a veteran of the racing world, crew chief for drivers like Kyle Busch and Bubba Wallace, and has accomplished a lot in this sport. In and out of sport has accomplished a lot. So I'm wishing the best of luck, wishing the best, and prayers go out to Jerry Baxter and his family. Hope we see him back at the racetrack soon. He is a current crew chief for Brad Holmes. It's unclear if he'll be there at the truck race tonight or they'll have an interim crew chief for Brad Holmes this weekend. Nonetheless, so wishing Jerry Baxter the best of luck and hopefully he can get better so he can be back out to the racetrack very, very soon because we miss seeing him out at the track and hopefully he'll be back at the racetrack really, really soon. And now we're going ahead to on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaden Honeycutt. As it was officially announced on Wednesday evening that Kaden Honeycutt is going to drive the 20 truck for Young's Motorsports this weekend at Darlington. Kaden Honeycutt has pretty much made a splash as one of the most underrated drivers in NASCAR today. He's basically driven for multiple teams, Roper Racing and also CHK Racing, and always gets the best out of equipment. And I think that Kaden Honeycutt, especially with the 20 truck, I think Kaden does have a really strong chance and a really strong potential possibility of running up front. I think Kaden's going to contend at least for top 20 or top 25. I think that truck's got enough owner's points. If it struggles a little bit in qualifying, I don't think it's going to run into problems in making the show and making the field. Nonetheless, so this is a pretty big pickup for Young's Motorsports. I think he's going to do a pretty awesome job, and I'm looking forward to seeing him out on the racetrack this weekend at Darlington. I'm really excited about it, and hopefully he can do a really good job this weekend at Darlington because I think he's got a chance to maybe get a pretty decent finish in tonight's Truck Series race at Darlington. Looking forward to seeing him out on the track. And now we're going ahead to on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jordan Taylor. As it was officially announced on Wednesday evening that Jordan Taylor is going to make his oval track debut this year at North Wilkesboro, driving for E33 Motorsports in the All-Star event at North Wilkesboro on Wednesday evening. Jordan Taylor, who's one of the best drivers on the other side of things in road racing, the guy has won the 2017 Royal 24 and has also won IMSA championships as well. Jordan Taylor's accomplished a lot. Of course, he made his NASCAR Cup Series debut at Circuit of the Americas in substitution for Chase Elliott. And Jordan Taylor has been testing to get some oval track experience. And I think Jordan Taylor would probably love to come and race in NASCAR in the future. This is definitely a step in the right direction. E33 Motorsports, from what I understand, they are overall a pretty good late model organization and a team that can compete. So I think that Jordan Taylor is going to have a really strong shot and a really strong possibility of potentially contending. But there's going to be a lot of really big competition at that event. Obviously, Chase Elliott is going to be in that race. I think Brad Keselowski is going to be in that race. I think William Sawalich is going to be in that race. There's a lot of good drivers who have late model experience that are going to be in that race Nonetheless, so it's exciting stuff to see Jordan Taylor going to be racing an oval track, and really excited to see he'll be doing some late model racing, and hopefully maybe in the future he decides to come to NASCAR and do some oval racing in the future. That'd be really, really exciting, and hopefully he does decide to make a decision to come over race, because it'd be really, really fun to have him. Hopefully he decides to make that decision. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kyle Larson. As it was announced last night that Kyle Larson will drive the 7 for Spire Motorsports next week at North Wilkesboro in the Truck Series. Remember, it was initially announced that Alex Bowman was supposed to be in that 7 truck for Spire Motorsports, but due to his injuries that he suffered a few weeks ago, Alex Bowman will not be behind the wheel of that number 7 truck. So Kyle Larson, of course, has HenderCars.com on his Cup Series ride, will be running that truck. This is a really good experience for Kyle Larson, as Kyle Larson will be the first time that he has ran an oval track. I think someone reported on this, but this will be the first time that Kyle Larson has raced on a pavement track in the Truck Series since 2016 at Homestead, driving, I believe, for GMS Racing. I think Kyle Larson is going to have a really good chance to get the victory in that number 7 truck. We've seen what the 7 truck's been able to do in the Truck Series. It's always been a contender, almost won a Daytona with Corey LaJoie, and we've seen this truck always run up front on a consistent basis. I think Larson does have a really good chance to get the victory. I think he's going to have Kevin Boney Manning as his crew chief, but Boney Manning is a really strong crew chief, and nonetheless, I think that Kyle Larson has a really good chance to win the Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro. I expect to be a pretty big threat. I expect him to be a contender. Nonetheless, I think he's going to have a really good chance and a really strong possibility of getting the victory. Watch Kyle Larson. I think he can get it done at North Wilkesboro next weekend. I expect him to be a contender. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kyle Larson once again. As Kyle Larson apparently has a podcast, and he says that Ross Chastain has the potential to be more popular than Chase Elliott. That is absolutely incredible to say, because remember, Kyle Larson is teammates with Chase Elliott, and he's saying that he potentially thinks that Chastain, because he actually likes Ross Chastain, even though him and Chastain have had problems in the past, he thinks that Ross Chastain could end up being more popular than Chase Elliott. And Ross Chastain, no doubt, is gaining popularity right now. But that is definitely a huge surprise to me, to see that Kyle Larson is saying publicly that he thinks that Chase Elliott may end up having a new driver for competition on the most popular award. And again, Kyle Larson's also probably the second most popular driver in Cup. Chase Elliott's probably the most. But then you probably have Ross Chastain, who's third. But like I just said a second ago, Ross Chastain is gaining a lot of traction right now when it comes to being very, very popular. But it's very interesting to hear a guy like Kyle Larson, who's accomplished a lot in this sport, him saying that there's a really strong chance of this happening. But personally, I'm here for it. I would love to see Ross Chastain be one of those popular drivers, because even though I don't personally agree with all the antics that Ross Chastain has done on the racetrack, I think Ross Chastain does have a really strong personality. And I think Ross Chastain is basically beginning to start owning that personality that he has. And I'm definitely here for that. I want to see Ross Chastain basically succeed, because if he starts winning races again, I think he's going to become more and more and more and more popular as time goes on. He's been succeeding a lot. He's a current points leader. He's the first driver to have 20 top fives in the next-gen era, which is absolutely huge and incredible. And I think it's just really cool to see, nonetheless, that we're seeing Ross Chastain, for guys like Kyle Larson, who's one of the best ever in NASCAR, basically saying that he believes that Ross Chastain has a chance, which I agree with Larson. I think Chastain does have somewhat of a chance, but it's very interesting to hear Kyle Larson say that. So do I think there's a chance for that to happen? Yeah, definitely, for sure, but it's something to watch as time goes on, and maybe, just maybe, we're going to see Ross Chastain potentially have more popularity than Chase Elliott. I think it's going to be tough to do, because Chase Elliott is extremely popular, and you got a lot of Dale Jr. fans that support Chase Elliott, because a lot of Junior fans went over to support Chase, but nonetheless, I think there's definitely a chance and a possibility of that happening. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about William Byron. Now, William Byron and Jeff Gluck basically did the 12 questions with William Byron. And William Byron basically says that he almost signed with Joe Gibbs Racing back in 2017. Now, let's go back a little bit of a flashback. In 2016, William Byron actually in 2015 drove for Junior Motorsports in the number 9 truck. But basically in 2016, William Byron started driving the number 9 truck for Kyle Busch Motorsports. And what's very interesting is that that was a Toyota team. And he almost signed with Joe Gibbs Racing, according to reports, in 2017. But William Byron made the decision to go work with Hendrick because William Byron basically wanted to drive for Hendrick Motorsports in his career. And basically his favorite driver, I believe, was either Jeff Gordon or Jimmy Johnson. Now, had William Byron gone and driven for Joe Gibbs Racing, the sport definitely right now would be looking a hell of a lot different than it basically would be right now, because you wouldn't have William Byron drive for Hendrick Motorsports, driving for one of the most successful organizations. And I don't know if William Byron, no disrespect to Byron, but I don't know if William Byron would have had the same success at Joe Gibbs Racing as he's had at Hendrick Motorsports. I think he made overall the right decision to join Hendrick Motorsports and be successful with that organization. So I hope that it ends up happening. I really, really love the fact that he stayed at Hendrick Motorsports, because I think Hendrick has basically got a gold mine. Yes, Byron's contract only goes through 2025, but it definitely would have been nonetheless very interesting to see William Byron drive for another organization, because could he have been successful? Who knows at this point? Nonetheless, so it's very interesting to hear that William Byron almost signed with Joe Gibbs Racing, because I think the sport would have looked a way different had he driven for Joe Gibbs Racing instead of Hendrick Motorsports, and Hendrick would have been in a much different position on what drivers, because it would have completely changed the sport in a very, very major way. So it's something interesting to look back at, and it's definitely something interesting to think about. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin. Now, if you watch an NASCAR Cup Series race at Kansas, you saw the last lap. Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin have been battling for about 20 laps, and they were battling really, really hard for the win. Now, we had heard Denny Hamlin's side on his podcast, Action Detrimental. We had not heard Kyle Larson's thoughts on it until yesterday. Kyle Larson went on Sirius XM NASCAR radio, and he says that basically racing between him and Denny Hamlin was just hard racing, and what Denny Hamlin did was not intentional. He just said it was good, hard racing. When I think of drivers who are probably the most fair in the sport, I think Kyle Larson potentially is one of the most fair drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series right now. But I 100% agree with Kyle Larson. Look, Kyle Larson right now is my favorite NASCAR Cup Series driver. And Larson, I know for a few seconds I was mad at Denny Hamlin. But then you have to think about it as the fan myself. I think that it was just really hard and really, really good racing out on a racetrack. And personally, I had no problem with what Denny Hamlin was doing, trying to go for a win. Because Denny Hamlin, he wants to win a NASCAR Cup Series race, and Denny Hamlin, no disrespect, but he's getting near the end of his NASCAR Cup Series career. Meanwhile, Kyle Larson is just beginning and is starting to win a lot of races. And I think even Denny and Chris Gabehart have said that Kyle Larson is going to end up winning more races than Denny Hamlin has. So Denny has to take a chance and an opportunity to go out there and win. Also, you think about the friendship that Larson and Hamlin have. I don't think Larson's really mad at Denny, because Larson and Hamlin are really, really good friends. To me, I think it was just really good, hard racing, and nothing foul between both of them. Yes, I know a lot of fans had their opinions, and trust me, I had my opinions at first, but I don't think it was dirty. I think it was just really hard, but really fair racing, and I really enjoyed the racing that we had at Kansas, and it was one of the greatest finishes we've ever seen. And personally, I really, really did enjoy it. So it was fun to watch, really loved it, and I absolutely enjoyed the last lap of that race because it was really, really fun to watch. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Rodney Childers. Now, Rodney Childers is one of the best when it comes to basically answering questions of fans. And he was asked a question about if he's going to return in 2024 as a crew chief. Well, Rodney Childers basically confirmed to the person, he says, yes, he will return as a crew chief in 2024. Now, it's not confirmed he'll be crew chief for in 2024, but it says he will return in 2024. There are a couple of potential possibilities where Rodney Childers could go and work. First, he could crew chief for Josh Berry, which would make a lot of sense. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors and rumors that Josh Berry is going to be driving a 4-car for Stu Ross Racing in 2024. Rodney Childers working with Josh Berry would make a lot of sense. There's also a potential possibility that he could move to another crew chief position in the Stu Ross Racing camp and maybe go crew chief for Chase Briscoe. Chase Briscoe is expected to become the leader of Stu Ross Racing after Kevin Harvick officially does end up retiring, and if Eric Almirola ends up retiring, that's a potential place where we could see Rodney Childers go to. Or maybe Rodney Childers leaves Ross Racing and goes in crew chiefs for Ryan Blaney. If I'm not mistaken, Rodney Childers actually did crew chief for Dave Blaney back in the early 2000s. So maybe we see Rodney Childers leave Ross Racing and go work with Team Penske, which a lot of people thought that was going to happen many, many years ago. But nonetheless, when it comes to this, I'm really happy to see that Rodney Childers is going to be returning as a crew chief in the 2024 season, because I think he is already one of the greatest crew chiefs of all time and has been very, very successful. He knows how to set up really amazing qualifying setups and some amazing race setups as well. So nonetheless, I think it's really awesome to see that Rodney Childers is officially going to be back next year. I think he's one of the greatest crew chiefs ever, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing him back on the track next year as a crew chief, because I think he's going to do a really good job as a crew chief once again next season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Chicago Street Course. Now, we've talked about the Chicago Street Course quite a bit on this channel for many, many reasons. But we had a recent report that came out from the Chicago Sun-Times basically saying, and people are wanting the Chicago Street Course basically gone after the 2023 season. And next year, they want Brandon Johnson, who's a new mayor of Chicago, to go ahead and look at it and get rid of the date. And they want it to basically be a one-and-year done deal. Now, obviously, when this contract was signed, remember, it's currently a 3-year deal from 2023 to 2025. Lori Lightfoot was the mayor. But Brandon Johnson has said publicly before he basically took over as mayor of Chicago, which he gets inducted 3 days from today, he basically said that they're going to look at the contracts. If you want my personal opinion and on the Chicago Street Course event, I'm not the biggest fan of the Chicago Street Course race. However, this event needs to go through at least for 2023 for a lot of reasons. Number one, you don't want to cancel event 50 days away, because we're 50 days away now from the event. It would be a very bad look for Chicago, and probably also a very bad look for NASCAR if they were to cancel this event. That being said, I think that there is a very strong chance and a possibility that this is going to be the only time we're going to be racing the Chicago Street Course event. And NASCAR does need to have a backup plan for 2024. That's where Road America or Chicagoland could come into play. And if you want my personal opinion, I would go to Chicagoland. Chicagoland is a really great racetrack, and we've seen how good the track can race. We saw how good the track race with the Gen 6 car, and Gen 6 car was not going a mile and a half. Chicago was one of the few tracks that raced really strong with on the mile and a half. I think a Gen 7 car would gel extremely well with this car. And also, Road America would be another great backup plan. Road America, we've seen how much better the road course racing was, at least at Dakota, and I think it's going to be really good at all the other road courses as well this season. But nonetheless, they're going to have a backup plan ready to go for the event. And I think NASCAR always has a backup plan ready to go for situations like this. I think they'll have something in the background ready to go, and I think they'll have something ready. So we'll see what happens, but I think this is going to be a one-and-done deal, and I think Chicago will not be around in 2024, and I think it'll be replaced by either Chicagoland or will end up being replaced by Road America. Nonetheless, so we'll see what happens, or maybe go to another street course race like Long Beach, and maybe that's where the street course race ends up happening, so we know other areas do truly want the event. Nonetheless, so it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in regards to that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Ryan Newman. Now, Ryan Newman is making his official return to the NASCAR Cup Series for the first time since the 2021 season. So this will be the first time that Ryan Newman will be driving a next-gen car. And Ryan Newman basically confirmed why he's not running a lot of bigger tracks besides Darlington. He says he doesn't want to race the bigger tracks because he doesn't want to be a crash test dummy. Now, obviously, Ryan Newman is only running Darlington to run the All-Stars at North Wilkesboro. And he's worried if he races basically at the bigger tracks, he's worried he doesn't want to become a big crash test dummy. Obviously, Ryan Newman is an engineer, and Ryan Newman hasn't involved in a lot of wrecks. A lot of people say, well, why is Ryan Newman getting back behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car if he's really worried? I think if there's anybody that has a right to be a little concerned, it is Ryan Newman. Ryan Newman's had 2 bars named after him. I believe there was a Newman bar after 2009, after the crash in 2009, when Ryan Newman basically went upside down at Talladega. And then in 2020, when Ryan Newman had a very, very vicious and really, really scary accident in the 2020 Daytona 500. It was a very, very bad wreck. So if I'm going to hear anybody talk about being a little skeptical of the next-gen car, Ryan Newman is definitely a guy who has a lot of engineering background and has an engineering degree. So if I'm going to trust anybody, I'm definitely going to trust Ryan Newman on that front. Look, I also don't disagree with Newman. We've had a lot of talk about the safety, and while so far this year, fingers crossed, we haven't really heard anything about the safety of the next-gen car, maybe besides basically the race at the Clash where they're hitting at really, really low speeds. That's something I'm a little worried about for Newman because there's some low corner speeds. But I do agree with Newman. I am a little concerned still. That being said, when it comes to this situation, it is great to see that Ryan Newman is going to be back in the NASCAR Cup Series. Don't get it twisted. It's been a few years, and I think this next-gen car has driven a lot of people in. We've seen Jimmy Johnson come back. We've seen Greg Biffle come back, and we've seen other drivers show interest, maybe like a Carl Edwards at one point was showing interest at one point, though Carl Edwards has not made a return, and maybe we'll hear if Carl Edwards is ever going to come back or not in the future. Nonetheless, so if I'm going to trust anybody when it comes to situation, I'm going to trust a driver like Ryan Newman, who has an engineering background and engineering experience as well. But I'm still nonetheless really happy to see that Ryan Newman is officially coming back, and I'm hoping he can do a really good job then when he makes his return and can be very, very competitive. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain. Now, Ross Chastain has been in the media and has been speaking a lot this week and is basically getting a lot of traction basically for his fight at Kansas Speedway. Well, Ross Chastain yesterday went on the Pat McAfee show, and he spoke about the fight with the people that were on the Pat McAfee show, and he says that everything is good with Noah Gragson. He said basically on that night, apparently there may have been a scuffle on the plane on the way back. But basically, Ross Chastain said everything between him and Noah is good at the moment. They work out the same training regime, and basically everything is good. Obviously, for any of us that I've already talked about a second ago, we've covered this a lot on this channel, the fight between Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain. They basically, Ross kind of ran Noah up the racetrack, and Noah tried to retaliate down the front stretch. After the race, Noah Gragson went to confront Ross Chastain. Noah Gragson put his hands on Ross Chastain, and then Ross multiple times said, stop, stop. And eventually, after Noah kept grabbing him, Ross kind of threw a haymaker in the face of Noah, and Noah tried to retaliate by punching him a couple times, and he was not able to get a few punches in. And it's really, though, good to see overall, though, that Ross Chastain is saying that things are good between him and Noah because they've known each other for years and they've raced against each other for years. When I think of Noah Gragson, when I think of Gragson and Chastain, this is really huge. And talk about how huge this is for Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain creates a lot of big headlines and creates a lot of storylines. And he went on the Pat McAfee show, which averages from 30 to 40,000 viewers per hour on that show. They get a huge audience and they get millions of views. And in fact, they're able to bring Ross Chastain on shows. And this is the second NASCAR driver they brought on this year low. Because remember, they brought Chase Elliott on at the beginning of the year when Chase Elliott was making his official return. So what I'm hoping is they can bring more NASCAR drivers on their show in the future. Guys like Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson would be another driver to bring on. Kyle Busch. We're not a big of a person like Kyle Busch has. He's another driver that absolutely needs to be brought on. They need to bring other drivers like Bubba Wallace on their show. They need to bring other drivers like a Daniel Suarez on their show. Ty Gibbs, Haley D. Bring drivers onto that show. They're going to create a lot of headlines and a lot of storylines. But nonetheless, this is a huge story to bring Ross Chastain on. And I thought it was really cool to see that because Ross Chastain is creating a lot of headlines and a lot of storylines. And as my opinion with Ross Chastain, I don't like some of the over-aggressiveness and the carelessness of some of the driving that he does. But as a driver, I think he is really good for the sport overall. And he's someone that can really carry the needle. And I think that he's someone that could be like the next major superstar. And in my opinion, if I'm NASCAR, we need to be capitalizing. And we've seen some of the social media presence that they are trying to capitalize on it, but they need to continue capitalizing on this and use it and grow the sport. This is really, really great to see, though, that Chastain was on the Pat McAfee show, and hopefully Chastain can be on more shows in the foreseeable future. So we'll see what happens, but nonetheless, it is really awesome to see Chastain go on the Pat McAfee show because I think it's really huge overall to have him on that show, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about North Wilkesboro. Now, next week is going to be a return of North Wilkesboro for the first time since 1996 for the NASCAR Cup Series. It will be the first base of the All-Star race, and the Truck Series will be returning for the first time a points-paying race at that track for the first time since 1996. There's been a lot of questions about the future past 2023 if North Wilkesboro is going to return in 2024 on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. Well, according to Marcus Smith, who is the president at SMI, they say that they are currently working on the 2024 schedule, and it sounds like there is the potential of a points-paying race happening in the 2024 season. As Marcus has said publicly multiple times, he thinks that there's a really good chance that a points-paying race at North Wilkesboro could end up happening. And honestly, I definitely really hope that that ends up happening where North Wilkesboro becomes a points-paying event. And we've been seeing over the last years, especially where NASCAR is going back to all of these legendary tracks. National Fairgrounds is being worked on currently at the moment, and they're getting closer and closer to potentially a Cup Series date returning there. It's obviously going to be a few years because there's things they do have to work on at the National Fairgrounds, but they're getting closer to returning there. And then you think about Rockingham. Rockingham Speedway, there's a really strong potential possibility of NASCAR going back there maybe as early as next season. And the track, unlike North Wilkesboro, which took a few years to get done, Rockingham is race ready and ready to go. They've been racing there for the last 2 years, so they could easily get back there and go back racing as early as next year. And then you think about what's going on right now with other tracks that could return in the future. I think I love the fact that they say homage to all the roots, and North Wilkesboro is really attractive. I think put on a really, really good show. And I am excited for the All-Star race too as a fan, because I think the All-Star race in 2023 is probably going to be good, especially what a lot of drivers have said, where they said that they're getting a lot of tire fall, so much tire fall to the fact they're getting 3 seconds of tire fall. And I think that's going to overall create a really intriguing and really exciting race. But I think the chance of North Wilkesboro becoming a points-paying race next year would be huge. If I'm NASCAR, I want to have like a North Carolina sweepstakes in May or Carolina sweepstakes. Have Darlington basically kick off the first or second week of March, then go to North Wilkesboro potentially, then have the Coast 600, and then have Rockingham maybe the week after. That would be a really fun time for NASCAR, have it all in that area. Have maybe in the month where it's kind of like in the Charlotte area or closer to Charlotte area. And that's what I would do if I'm the NASCAR schedule. But nonetheless, it is really exciting to see that they're working on next year's schedule already. And it sounds like North Wilkesboro has a really strong chance and a really strong possibility of being a points-paying race. The fact that they're discussing it already, even though the schedule, because again, the schedule probably will be done in August or September. Yes, NASCAR does have a lot of things that they're focusing on currently at the moment going into the future. But nonetheless, overall, this is really, really something to continue to watch as time goes on. If this race is successful next week, which I think it is going to be a really strong race in my opinion, I think that we're going to see a very fun race at North Wilkesboro. So nonetheless, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited, and I can't wait to see it. But it sounds like a points-paying race could be happening in 2024 at North Wilkesboro, and I'm absolutely here for it. And hopefully, the race does officially make its return in 2024 as a points-paying race. Yes, it's running as the All-Star race, and yes, the Truck Series will have a points-paying race there. But nonetheless, it's something to continue to watch as time goes on. And it sounds like the chance of North Wilkesboro being a points-paying race in 2024 are becoming very, very likely. Now we're going to jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about the Brickyard 400. Now, Bob Pockers is asking drivers in the industry about things that they really would like to see return in the 2024 year. And Kyle Busch said that he would love to see the Brickyard 400 return in 2024. And according to reports and insights, especially as of recently, it sounds like there's a really strong chance and a possibility for the Brickyard 400 to return in 2024. The rumor going around the garage right now is it sounds like there's a really strong chance and possibility of this race officially returning in the 2024 year. And it would make a lot of sense. It would be the 30-year anniversary of the initial Brickyard 400 in 1994, which Jeff Gordon won. And this is something that's not new. The drivers in NASCAR have been really wanting the Brickyard 400 to return. And I'm going to give my thoughts on this. First thing, it sounds like that this actually will happen in 2024. Here's my opinions on the Brickyard 400. There's positives and negatives. Number one, I think that Brickyard 400, in my opinion, should absolutely return in 2024. But there are positives and negatives to this. In the positives, you have the Crown Jewel race actually returning. The other side of things, the negative side, though, is that the optics of the track are not going to look as good with the attendance. But even if you still have 60,000 people showing up, that is still a lot of people. But the Brickyard 400, in my opinion, should absolutely return to the NASCAR Cup Series schedule. It's a crown jewel event, and we've looked at the last couple years of the road course race. We've had broken curbs, and we've had driver etiquette go out the window. I think the idea of having the Indy road course for the first 2 years and even this year, I thought was really, really cool. And I think it might be a better race, especially with the road course package being a lot better this year for the NASCAR Cup Series. But the driver etiquette in Cup, especially on late race restarts, has completely gone out the window. And that's a huge reason why I think the race is trying to turn into a shambolic race and not a race that a lot of fans look at. And yes, I know the Brickyard the last 2 years of its running on the main track was not loved by a lot of people, not by a lot of fans, loved by a lot of fans, and I was not the biggest fan of the Brickyard idea. And when they initially decided to go the Indy road course idea, I thought it was a really good idea from NASCAR. But after the last years, I'm for returning to Brickyard. And we've seen the next gen cars race at tracks similar to like a Pocono and Michigan. Yes, Michigan and Pocono are not completely the same, but Pocono is kind of similar. But Pocono put on a pretty solid next gen race last year. And I think that we could see the next gen car race decent at Brickyard. Now, obviously, it's not going to be perfect because Brickyard is not really meant for stock cars. It's meant for Indy cars. It was built as an Indy car spec track and not a stock car spec track. That being said, I do personally believe that NASCAR should 100% make its official return to the actual Brickyard 400. Bring the Crown Jewel track back. It needs to happen, and I think the Indy Road Course has run their course. I think it needs to go back there to the Brickyard. And obviously, I think it will happen in 2024 because it sounds like there's a really strong chance and a likely chance of possibly of it ending up happening. And like I said, I think the chance of the Brickyard 400 returning in 2024 is really, really high and very, very likely, as the garage has indicated for the last 2 weeks. I think it's going to happen. I think it will end up happening, and I think it could put on a pretty good show. And again, bringing a Crown Jewel event back. I know there's also been talk that they could rotate it to where we could have the Brickyard 400 next year, then 2025 go back to the road course, and 2026 go back on the traditional oval, which honestly, that would not be a bad shot because you get the best of both worlds. 1 year you're on the oval, next year you're on the road course, and I would not think that would actually not overall be a bad decision or a bad shot either. So it's going to be interesting to see what NASCAR does decide to do in regards to that. Nonetheless, though, it's something to keep an eye on for sure. But like I said, I think it sounds like there's a really strong chance and a possibility of this happening, and I'm hoping it does end up happening as well because I want the Brickyard 400 to return. Because like I said, I think the racing product is going to be a lot better on the oval than it is on the road course because you're not going to have people running into each other, and with the driver etiquette, how bad it's gotten, I think it's going to be better on the oval than it is on the road course. Like I said, there are negatives to it. You're going to have pretty bad optics, but when you have a basically stadium that's full of 300,000 people, it's not going to look as good. And I think it's, again, you also look at TV rating side of things too. We saw 4 million people watch the last Brickyard 400. Yes, it was during COVID times. We have 4 million people watching that. The Indy road course race gets 2 million people at best. Yes, on USA, but gets 2 million people at best. So obviously, I think they do need to return to the Brickyard 400 and bring that event back, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As Kyle Busch, once again, has another new sponsor, and it is Thornton's. Thornton's is going to sponsor Kyle Busch at North Wilkesboro next weekend in the All-Star race and potentially other races in 2023. Now, Thornton's obviously has sponsored RCR cars in the past, so this technically is not a new sponsor, but actually technically is a new sponsor for Kyle because this is now the 4th company that I don't think sponsored RCR last year that has sponsored Kyle Busch. Now, Kyle Busch has had a lot of new sponsors in 2023. Obviously, a lot of companies that have sponsored Rich Schultz Racing. That being 3Chi, of course, Alsco Uniforms, which is a big proud sponsor of RCR. Cheddar Scratch Kitchen sponsor Kyle Busch, and other companies have sponsored Kyle Busch this year that are part of the RCR brand, including Lucas Oil. But there's a lot of companies that are not part of the RCR brand that joined this year to sponsor Kyle Busch. Netspend, Mark III Benefits, Van Benefits, another company that came in. I think there was another one that came in, if I'm not mistaken. And now Thornton's has sponsors. Kyle Busch has had 4 new sponsors that have technically sponsored him this year. And this is like the 7th or 8th different paint scheme that he's had in the 2023 season. Now, a lot of people say, well, Joe Gibbs tried to get rid of him and stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I'll get into that situation there. You look what happened with Joe Gibbs Racing and saying, hey, Kyle Busch was able to get new sponsors. Joe Gibbs did not try to get new sponsors. And I think there's definitely a chance that ended up happening. But Joe Gibbs Racing, when it comes to how they run their stuff compared to how basically Richard Schultz Racing runs, Joe Gibbs Racing tries to go after one major key sponsor and one major big sponsor. With Richard Childress Racing, they go after smaller sponsors. But the way that Richard Childress is doing it now, compared to how Joe Gibbs is doing it, I think is the way that a lot of teams are looking at, because you don't have a lot of big companies, especially nowadays, sponsoring major deals. There's only a few drivers in NASCAR that have like one major key sponsor for a majority of the season. There's only a couple. Joey Logano and Kyle Larson, because Denny Hamlin, not really anymore, because FedEx has backed off, and it sounds like there's a really good chance that FedEx may not return in 2024, and Denny may not basically have that sponsorship in 2024. But you think about Kyle Busch, and it just shows that Kyle Busch definitely can be a driver that's sponsored, and Kyle Busch has also been really appreciative of those sponsors as well, because if you think of Rich Schultz Racing and those sponsors, they have been really appreciative of working with Kyle Busch. And Kyle Busch also, so far in 2023, has had quite a bit of success. Already scoring 2 victories in the 2023 season. And I think when they see Kyle Busch winning and being up front on a consistent basis, it makes those sponsors happy. It makes the driver happy overall as well. And just see that Kyle Busch continues to pick up new sponsors on a consistent basis is really great to see. And I really hope we get to see more new sponsors. Could we eventually see Rowdy Energy, which is, of course, a company that Kyle Busch owns? Could we eventually see a company like Rowdy Energy sponsor Kyle Busch on a Cup Series car? Is most definitely certainly possible. What about LA Golf? LA Golf could be a potential sponsor possibility. What about other companies that come into play? Maybe, I don't know, like Busch or Budweiser, maybe. That could be a potential crazy possibility. Having a Budweiser sponsored a car, that would definitely be wild and really, really crazy as well. But it's just really cool to see that Kyle Busch continues to pick up new sponsors and new paint schemes, among other things, on his cars. It's really great to see. And again, I love the fact that Kyle Busch continues to pick up new sponsors, because it's been a story we've been following all year. It's all the success, and just seeing Kyle Busch pick up new sponsors all the time is really awesome and really, really great to see. And I think Kyle Busch does have a really good chance to win that race with the Thornton's car. Kyle Busch seems to win with new sponsors, it seems like, because the 2 companies that he's had are McLaren Auto Grills. First time they were in a Cup Series car, and they ended up winning. And then, of course, Lucas Oil, which sponsored Kyle Busch for the first time, and they ended up winning. So maybe this Thornton's car will get the win. We'll have to wait and see what happens with what ends up happening. But nonetheless, so it's really great to see that Kyle Busch continues to pick up new sponsors, and I'm happy to see that he does have a new sponsor for next week. And I think Thornton's main sponsor for a couple races, I'm not entirely sure. But nonetheless, I love the fact that Kyle Busch continues to pick up new sponsors on a week-by-week basis, and I love that he has a new sponsor for the All-Star race. It looks awesome. It looks phenomenal. So, because I think the paint scheme looks incredible, and I love that Kyle Busch does have a new sponsor. So, that is for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below with that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are the thoughts about Kyle Busch picking up a new sponsor? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other stories discussed today on the channel, including the potential of the Brickyard 400 returning in 2024? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later tonight on the channel, we have the NASCAR Truck Series race review from Darlington Raceway. Then on Saturday, we have the NASCAR Xfinity Series race review from Darlington. And Sunday, we have the Cup Series race review from Darlington. Then the next week, we got a lot of content coming out. We've got Indy 500 entry list dropping on the channel, among other things that I think you're going to enjoy. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. We're trying to reach 2,500 subscribers by the end of this year. And if you enjoyed today's channel, if you're new, make sure to subscribe. So I'll see you guys next time for more awesome content. Take care, everybody.